today. We need it done right now for relief for American citizens. And I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman from Texas.
I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Murphy.
Gentleman from Florida for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Last week, the Senate passed a bipartisan bill to fix the National Flood Insurance Program to protect homeowners from unaffordable rate hikes. It is beyond time for the House to follow suit by passing this bipartisan bill, which will help millions of Americans facing steep flood insurance rate increases, including thousands of residents across the Palm Beaches and Treasure Coast. The bill includes additional funding for FEMA to redraw flood maps accurately so homeowners do not face erroneous rate hikes in my district and around the country. Any proposed rate hikes must be delayed until the affordability study gives Congress a better understanding of how unaffordable rate hikes would negatively impact the flood insurance program. I urge my colleagues to defeat the previous question so we can pass this bipartisan, common-sense solution that will provide much-needed relief for homeowners across America. I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
I reserve my time.
Gentleman continues to reserve. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pasquarello.
Gentleman from New Jersey for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Madam Speaker, Mr. Chairman, I appeal to you to make this an urgent issue. Urgency, I think, is very critical here. So I rise in opposition to the previous question so that we can consider the Homeowner Flood Insurance Affordability Act. In the wake of Hurricane Sandy, over 74,000 national flood insurance program claims were submitted in New Jersey from policyholders. To date, the NFIP has paid over $3.5 billion in Sandy claims. It has served as a lifeline to thousands of New Jersey residents whose lives are turned upside down by the storm. The funds paid out through those claims have helped our neighbors rebuild our homes, businesses, regardless of what political affiliation, persuasion. We're all affected by this. Estimates indicate that the total cost of Sandy will be between $12 and $15 billion, making Sandy the second costliest flood event after Hurricane Katrina. So it is true that we need to make changes to ensure the NFIP remains solvent. However, the rollout of the 2012 reforms to NFIP have been fraught with issues. I'm hearing from constituents of Little Ferry and Moonachie particularly, which were devastated by Sandy. This is destroying property values, disrupting the real estate markets in the communities of New Jersey and across this country. That's why it's so critical that we revisit flood insurance reform by passing H.R. 3370. This legislation will prevent premium rate hikes until FEMA completes the affordability study. Is there any possibility? 30 seconds? You got time?
I yield the gentleman an additional 30 seconds.
Thank you. The affordability study called for by the original Biggert Waters flood insurance reform legislation, giving FEMA a chance to implement an affordability framework. The bill establishes an appeal process for remapping and creates an advocate position within FEMA. Just last week, a bipartisan majority in the Senate did approve this bill, as you've already heard. It is time to bring this vital legislation to the floor. Again, I appeal to the chairman. This is urgent, not simply because we had two major storms in the last few years, but because Americans all over this country are affected one way or the other, if not by a storm off the ocean, a snowstorm, or even worse. So I ask you specifically, do what you can to make this, put this in front of us as soon as possible. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much, and I appreciate the gentleman from New Jersey, my dear friend, who joins with others of his colleagues who, in fact, most politely and appropriately have brought this issue to the Rules Committee. I will tell you that there was an assertion made a minute ago that I was unaware of, and that was a jurisdictional issue that evidently the Rules Committee does have. I've tried to be forthright with this the whole time, and that is that I believe it is the right thing for the men and women of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party who have approached me. I have consistently tried to invoke myself into the process with an answer through the committee, which I thought was the Committee of Jurisdiction, solely of jurisdiction. I will look at the gentleman from Massachusetts, the gentleman from New Jersey, both very dear friends who see me every day, and I see them. I am not trying to evade. I'm not trying to obfuscate. I'm not trying to pass the buck on this. I've indicated I will be willing to be a part of this compromise. I will look back at the gentleman, my friend, Mr. Pascal, and tell him I am personally involved in this. I will continue to be personally involved in it. I'm delighted that the Senate came up with their answer, which was a short-term answer, not a fix. And I believe that there's a fix that's tried to be looked at right now, one which is, I think, more amenable to the circumstance. If that effort fails, I will continue to stay in touch with not only the ranking member of the committee, Mrs. Slaughter, who's pressed me also, but also my friends who have approached me today. And I will very respectfully acknowledge that what they are doing here today to come to the floor to do this is appreciated. What I would say to them is, I don't know that voting against the rule, them believing they're going to take this down, would get this process done. It's not included in the rule, but I will tell each of my friends that are here today, I'm going to continue working on this, and I intend to have an answer quickly. And I appreciate the gentleman. I reserve my time.
Gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Deutsch.
Gentleman from Florida for 1 minute.
Thank you. I thank my friend for yielding. Madam Speaker, last week the President called on Congress to embark on a year of action in which we all work together to put opportunity and financial security within the grasp of America's families. Just a few days later, the Senate took bipartisan action to protect thousands of homeowners in my home state of Florida and across the country for massive premium hikes on their flood insurance. These hikes are breaking the backs of America's families. They're bringing down home values at a time when our housing market is just starting to pick up again. There is no question that the financial health of the thousands of families who could lose their homes as a result of these premium rate increases has to be a priority, has to be an urgent priority of this House. Rather than gutting environmental protections, let's focus on the concerns of real homeowners. Let's pass the Homeowner Flood Insurance Affordability Act so that FEMA can reform the flood insurance program and protect America's families at the same time. It is urgent that we move forward. I thank the gentleman for making this an urgent priority. The way to do it, however, is to let us proceed with this today. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, I'll continue to reserve my time. Thank you.
Gentleman continues to reserve. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Connecticut, Ms. DeLauro.
Gentlelady from Connecticut for 1 minute.
The Homeowner Flood Insurance Affordability Act overwhelmingly passed the Senate with bipartisan support. It needs to pass the House of Representatives. We need to stabilize flood insurance rates before families are further impacted by FEMA's poor implementation, inaccurate mapping, and incomplete data, which has led to unimaginable increases in premiums. We came together in a bipartisan basis in 2012 to reform the National Flood Insurance Program, put it on a path to stability. But Congress never intended to allow the punitive flood insurance premiums FEMA is now imposing on homeowners. A constituent of mine from Milford, Connecticut, anticipates paying a rate as much as 5,000% higher than he was paying. And yes, I have heard from many constituents. The Senate legislation would delay these increases until FEMA completes the study, ensuring that new rates are affordable for families, as was called for in the 2012 law. 182 members of this body, Republicans and Democrats, support a similar bill. We can get this done. We need to get this done, and we can do it today. I call on the Speaker to stop fiddling while Rome burns.
Gentleman from Texas.
I'll continue to reserve my time.
Gentleman continues to reserve. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Enyart.
Gentleman from Illinois for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to urge my colleagues to bring the Homeowner Flood Insurance Affordability Act up for a vote. It is crucial that we fix the critical problems created by the rushed implementation of the Insurance Act of 2012. We cannot ensure the National Flood Insurance Program's long-term viability at the expense of homeowners and potential buyers. Opponents of Senate-passed flood insurance bill say that it overwhelmingly benefits wealthy Americans who buy beachfront property. I urge those opponents to come to my Southern Illinois district. My district borders more than 150 miles on the mighty Mississippi. The folks who live there are not owners of second homes nor vacation rentals, but are middle-class families in Jackson County, Union County, Alexander County, and in the American bottoms of the Metro East St. Louis area. Without reform, people in my district and across the U.S. will see their property values plummet. Many of these properties have been family homes for generations and have never once endured flooding. I urge that we pass this act now.
Gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, at this time I'll continue to yield, reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, this time I'm proud to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Louisiana, a co-sponsor of the Homeowners Flood Insurance Affordability Act, Mr. Richmond.
2 minutes to the gentleman from Louisiana.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I will take Mr. Sessions at his word, and I believe him to be sincere and genuine in his desire to see this problem fixed. I would just remind Mr. Sessions and Congress that we don't have time to wait on this issue. Every day there's a sale that's delayed or a sale that doesn't go through because the flood insurance is so high that the new purchaser doesn't want to pay for it, and every day the owner's short selling a house because they have to get out of it and they can't afford to wait. So when we talk about home ownership, we're talking about responsible Americans. We're talking about 1.7 million people in this country that saved up to participate in the bedrock of the American dream. And now government and FEMA and now Congress is turning their piece of the American dream into a government-made nightmare. And we have the ability here today to fix this. And the part about it is, right now, we're not asking for politics. We're not trying to be over-dramatic. We're just asking for a solution, and we want to fix it. In fact, we're here today talking about a Republican bill that solves the problem. That's because, for me, this is not about politics. It's about people. It's about purpose, and it's about making sure that not rich people who own riverfront and lakefront and oceanfront property are taken care of. It's about our seniors who own a home on Main Street or smack dab in our community that they saved, they sacrificed, they did everything right, played by all the rules. And now FEMA has come in and decided we're going to create new flood maps. And the sad part about it is that if you're a community and you built levees and you increased your flood protection and you did it with your own money, FEMA does not even count it because they didn't pay for it. So communities who have saved money to help themselves like we do in America, that if we have a problem, we fix it. So my communities that put up millions of dollars to build levees don't even get it recognized because the government didn't pay for it. So, Madam Speaker, I would just ask all my colleagues, let's do what's right. Let's help people and put people over politics. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much. The gentleman from Louisiana is most accurate when he describes not just the problem, but problems which are associated with the way FEMA has initiated this process. I will not sit here and beat anyone up over what they did or did not do. I recognize that I have disagreements myself. I have disagreements with myself as a member of Congress from Dallas, Texas. But what I would say to the gentleman, and he is sitting right next to the ranking member of the Financial Services Committee, these are issues that have to be resolved. And they are larger, I believe, in what you've heard me say today. I think they're trying to look at solving more than just the extension problem. They're trying to solve some problems. I could be wrong about that. I'm not in the negotiation. I'm around the negotiation. But the gentleman, most assuredly, has come to the floor today for the right reason, I believe, with a pretty good message. Everybody is impacted that lives in these areas. We don't need to say one group of people or another, or people that live in high rises or low rises. What we do need to say is, and acknowledge, and I do, that each of my colleagues, I've been approached by colleagues on the Republican side and the Democrat side. I intend to stay after this issue, and I respect the gentleman for the way he approached it today. And I owe him, I'm looking him right in the eye, I owe him an answer on this too. I'm part of the problem just as he is, and we've got to find a solution. I'll reserve my time.
Gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Frankel.
Gentlelady from Florida for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We have a crisis in Florida and across this nation where our constituents are facing skyrocketing jumps in flood insurance premiums, making homeownership unaffordable. Madam Speaker, floods are not partisan, and homeownership makes communities safer, more secure, and more economically vibrant. Madam Speaker, let's fix this crisis now. I yield the rest of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Massachusetts, my colleague, Mr. Lynch.
Gentleman from Massachusetts for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thank the gentleman for yielding. I rise today to urge a no vote on the previous question so this House can bring the Homeowner Flood Insurance Affordability Act up for a vote. This bipartisan legislation will provide a critical relief for families who have been devastated by outrageous flood insurance increases required by recent changes to the flood insurance program. FEMA's insistence on moving forward with these extreme rate hikes without first completing an affordability study and certifying that their mapping techniques are accurate, as required by Congress in the Biggert Waters Act, has created a crisis for working families who can't afford to pay 5 or 10 times more for flood insurance. Before we ask the American taxpayer to pay 1 cent more in premiums, we need to ensure that FEMA is implementing the flood insurance program in a fair and lawful way. Now, we're not asking to repeal that law. We're just asking for a timeout while we figure this out. And we're asking that we do an affordability study so that we don't force people out of their homes. There's no sense doing it after the people are gone. We need this done the right way. We can help middle-class homeowners across the country by voting no on the previous question and bringing up the Homeowner Protection Act. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman from Texas.
I'll continue to reserve my time.
Reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman.
Gentleman from California for 1 minute.
I'm here with the ranking member of the Financial Services Committee. She and I represent a city built in the desert, suffering from a drought. We interrupted our rain prayer meeting to come here and to talk about how flood insurance is critical to the national interest. We should not burden our economy with a situation in which people can't buy their home, sell a home, live in their home. It's time for us to defeat the previous question motion and take up on the floor of this House a bill that had overwhelming bipartisan support in the Senate, that has 182 co-sponsors here in the House. It's time to stop partisan wrangling and deal with bipartisan legislation critical to homeowners from one coast to the other, and yes, a few in Los Angeles as well. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. With great respect to the gentleman, I would once again offer an explanation, and that is that this, what they're talking about with this motion recommit is not germane to the bill and would not go back to the Committee of Jurisdiction. And so by voting against what would be the rule or the motion to for a motion to recommit would not accomplish what the gentleman is trying to do. And that is why I've tried to take, Madam Speaker, as I've tried meticulously with speaker after speaker, my friends, my colleagues that have a strong opinion about this, I've tried to say to them that I do recognize that while I don't believe I have the jurisdictional elements within the Rules Committee, that I will continue to work on this and believe that there can be an answer. And so I would respond back to the gentleman from Los Angeles and tell him, thank you for coming to the floor. But an answer for this really needs to come from the committee, that we need to then work through the Rules Committee and get it on the floor, and I am committed to that entire process and will continue to do that. And I thank the gentleman from Los Angeles, my friend, for him taking time to come down. But I don't want him to believe that by winning a vote on the motion to recommit that it will have any impact on that endeavor. I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized and advised that he has 1.5 minutes remaining.
Madam Speaker, I have no further requests for time. I will ask the gentleman if he has any other speakers.
I thank the gentleman. I have no further requests for speakers either, so I will let the gentleman go ahead and
Madam Speaker,
use his time.
I yield myself the balance of the time.
The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, first of all, I ask unanimous consent to insert the text of my amendment in the record along with extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question.
Without objection.
And again, I urge all my colleagues to vote no and defeat the previous question. Madam Speaker, I appreciate the Chairman of the Rules Committee expressing his willingness to ponder and reflect and consider and contemplate and speculate on this legislation. But look, time is of the essence here. If the House votes to defeat the previous question, we can bring this up. There's no reason why we can't bring this up. And the Rules Committee has jurisdiction over this issue, too. And if there are any glitches here, quite frankly, the Rules Committee can meet immediately and waive all the rules, because that's what my friends do on so many other bills. Look, one of the frustrations that we have on our side of the aisle is that my friends on the majority keep on bringing bills to the floor that mean nothing, that are going nowhere. This issue of flood insurance is a big deal. You have heard from members from all across the country. They want action now, not sometime in the future. They want it now. And by voting to defeat the previous question, we can bring this up, we can deal with this, we can actually help some people in this country for a change and do the right thing. So I urge my colleagues to defeat the previous question, and if they don't defeat the previous question, defeat the rule. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Texas, who is advised that he has 5.5 minutes remaining.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much. Madam Speaker, I will once again do the very best that I can, and with great respect and appreciation to my very dear friend from Massachusetts, who has been a part of, since I recall, at least early December, the discussion in the Rules Committee with the gentleman, his colleague, my colleague from Florida, Mr. Hastings. Judge Hastings pushed this issue appropriately. The members of the committee from Florida have graciously pushed this issue forward. The bottom line is that I believe the gentleman and I need to meet to speak about the jurisdiction that he refers to. The jurisdiction that I believe that the Rules Committee has is not related to the policy. The policy, which is what the provisions that are contained within the problems that we're talking about today, the policy issues are within the jurisdiction of the Financial Services Committee. Today, we are on the floor of the House of Representatives with a rule with the jurisdiction to the Natural Resources Committee. The motion to recommit is not germane to the Natural Resources Committee. So voting or believing that you could, through a motion to recommit, winning that and getting this bill on the floor is simply, through the previous question, is simply not something that I believe is realistic or something that we should even suggest to people that would happen. What we are talking about today is a bill with the jurisdiction through the Natural Resources Committee, and I would like to confine my remarks now on the bill that is before the House. Madam Speaker, I have had the pleasure of growing up as a lifelong Texan, but had the opportunity to visit and live in other states in our great United States. I've had an opportunity to visit national parks, national lands, land that is owned by all the American people. As an active Eagle Scout and the father of 2 Eagle Scouts, and my father is an Eagle Scout, We have been in national parks all over this country. That's what this legislation is about today. It is about national parks and the use therein. Some number of bills that have been cobbled together, yes, they were cobbled together so that we could come up with a policy that is trying to be worked on through a group of men and women here in the United States House of Representatives on a bipartisan basis, as well as a bicameral basis. We had an understanding that we would try and do this about this week, early last year. So I want you to know that what we're doing is bringing forth a bill which is important to people in how they deal with their families, recreation, as well as the importance of vital economic help to various areas of the United States. I've witnessed the educational and recreational opportunities that we're talking about today, and they possess near limitless opportunities for not only my generation but the next generation of Americans who want to enjoy America. And I think that we today, by this bill, have given us a refreshed new opportunity on a bipartisan, bicameral basis to address that issue, and that's why I support increasing access to public lands for hunting, fishing, and recreational shooting so others may have this same opportunity. So I am a yes and would encourage my colleagues to be yes on what the legislation is about today, not something that's not germane, and another issue which I have tried to appropriately address here today. And it is urgent, but that's not what we're doing right here, right now. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on the rule, yes on the underlying legislation, and to be a part of moving this bill to the Senate, then on to the President's desk. And I yield back my time and move the previous question on the resolution.
Gentleman yields back, and the question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution. Those in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
On that, I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the Chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of adoption of this resolution. This is a 15-minute vote, a 15-minute vote.
Well, you may have heard a lot of talk about flood insurance in the last hour or so. The underlying bill is a bill that would promote hunting and shooting on public lands. Democrats throughout the past hour have been calling on the House to bring up legislation dealing with the flood insurance rate, a bill that passed in the Senate last week. This is the previous question vote, and that's the intent of the Democrats in this 15-minute vote. Again, the underlying bill is an expansion of hunting and shooting measures. It's a combination of some 8 bills into one public lands bill. We spoke to a reporter who's been covering the issue for a more broader look at the bill. The House begins debate on a package of bills dealing with hunting and fishing on federal lands, and we're joined by Phil Taylor, who's covering the issue for Environment and Energy Publishing. Phil Taylor, this bill is a package of a number of other hunting and fishing bills. Tell us what all's in here.
Well, it's a package of about 8 or 9 titles. The foundational title that has garnered the support of a lot of hunting and angling groups is Title 8 by Representative Dan Benishek. And at its core, it basically would amend the organic statutes of the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, and the Forest Service to ensure that those land management agencies, which oversee hundreds of millions of acres of public lands in the United States, mostly in the West, it would ensure that those land managers would take into account hunting and fishing and target shooting opportunities as they put together their land management plans.
So the net effect of this bill is that it would expand hunting and fishing on those lands?
That's the intent. You know, there's some debate going on in the House right now about whether or not hunting and fishing opportunities are really being stifled on public lands. This legislation really is to provide some legal teeth for these agencies so they can defend the decisions to open lands to hunting and fishing if they're ever taken to court. And so there is some language in that bill that has garnered some opposition from backcountry hunters, for example. It involves protections for wilderness lands. By and large, that title in the bill is supported by most hunting and fishing organizations.
Early on in the debate, you tweeted about that. Will lead ammunition hamper passage of the sportsman's package this Congress? What are they proposing? What's proposed in this bill about lead ammunition?
Well, that title has hampered passage of similar sportsman's packages in the Senate. It basically says that the Toxic Substances Control Act does not apply to ammunition or fishing tackle. And that's been the impression of the U.S. EPA for years now. Some groups have significant concerns with the impacts of lead ammunition on birds, particularly the endangered California condor. As well as potential impacts to humans who consume wild game killed by lead ammunition. Now, again, a majority of sportsmen's groups don't believe there's a significant environmental or health concern here. The bill, the title would basically clarify that EPA does not have the authority to regulate lead ammunition. And the issue, though, is that in the Senate, some leading Democrats have taken a very strong stance against that title. When Senator Jon Tester in late 2012 tried to push a broader sportsman's package that had this same language in it, Senator Barbara Boxer and Senator Ben Cardin, raised vocal opposition to that. And it's one of the elements that probably hampered its ultimate passage.
On wild game, there's a provision in this bill, I understand, that deals with polar bear trophies from Canada. What would it do?
Basically, and I'm not familiar with the specifics of that title, but it essentially would give the Fish and Wildlife Service the authority to allow hunters who killed polar bears outside the country legally harvested polar bears would be allowed to import those into the United States. There are certain legal restrictions to doing so right now based on their endangered status under the Endangered Species Act. And again, this is a title that it's not opposed by many people. There's some wildlife advocacy groups that have raised concerns with it, but it has generated some controversy, no doubt.
In general, how's the White House view this sportsman's bill, this hunting and fishing bill that's coming up in the House?
Well, the White House issued a statement of policy last night opposing the bill. They do support some of the titles. Notably, they did say they don't oppose, they don't have any issue with the title involving the clarification of EPA's authority with respect to lead ammunition and fishing tackle. They did say they had concerns with, again, Title 8, the title by Congressman Benishek. They share the concerns of some conservation groups that there's some troubling language involving environmental reviews under the National Environmental Policy Act, as well as wilderness protections. But there was no veto threat. So the White House is not on board with this legislation, but they're not going to veto it.
Phil Taylor covers the Energy Department and the Forest Service and Interior Department for Energy and Environment and Energy Publishing, and you can follow his reporting on Twitter at Philip A. Taylor. Thank you for that update.
Thanks for having me.
The underlying bill expanding hunting and fishing on public lands. This is a vote on the previous question before they vote on the rule. The rule would allow for an hour of general debate and nearly a dozen amendments. What we expect is that if the House passes the rule, we'll get general debate this afternoon and amendment debate, but final passage not until tomorrow or later in the week. We are covering a number of other congressional hearings today on Capitol Hill across the C-SPAN networks, hearings looking at the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, the Iran nuclear negotiations, and other hearings, including one this morning that was a look at That was a look at foreign intelligence threats. A number of the top intelligence department officials testified this morning. And the CQ writes that the House Intelligence Chairman Mike Rogers struck out at the administration policy on setting more stringent standards for the authorization of drone strikes. What we're going to do is show you the opening statements from that Intelligence Committee hearing, first with Chairman Rogers, and then from the ranking Democrat, Dutch Ruppersberger. We'll show you as much as we can of those statements in the beginning of the hearing as this 15-minute vote continues.
It's been quite a year for the intelligence community. The harm done to America by the constant flood of illegal disclosures these past 8 months is outmatched only by the shocking volume of critical information that was stolen and likely disclosed to our adversaries. As the Department of Defense recently explained, we have experienced the single largest compromise of national security information in our nation's history. And we are not talking about business records and phone metadata. These compromises go to the very core of this country's ability to defend itself. They seriously threaten the capabilities of every one of our armed services, the Army, Air Force, Marines, Navy. And long into the future, the stolen material will threaten the safety and security of our soldiers and Marines in the field. Yet at a time when our intelligence agencies need leadership and clear direction, they must endure what appears to be more regulatory confusion emanating from the administration. For 5 long years, we have witnessed delays, incoherence, and confusion and policies that do little but make it difficult for our intelligence agencies to do their work. Red lines aren't enforced. One task force reviews another task force. Important legal programs are changed even though they have done nothing wrong. And indecision on key covert action activities has had serious negative consequences to the national security of the United States. When it comes to America's current approach to national security, there is only one thing that is certain, and that is our allies have no clue what our policy is from one day to the next. We just returned from the Munich Security Conference. We had roughly 10 bilateral meetings in a bipartisan delegation. To the individual, they expressed frustration over the lack of clarity in U.S. policy when it comes to engagements in rough parts of the world. As a matter of fact, one particular very senior official highlighted the confusion when he stated that on serious policy matters very recently received direction from the Pentagon that was different from the same direction he got from the State Department, that was different from the direction he got from the White House. You can imagine the frustration of our allies in a very troubled time. Talking about the problem, reviewing the problem, assigning a task force to think about the problem is causing serious problems. Our adversaries completely see it as weakness. And we look to see how the world has evolved in response to these last 5 years. America's strength and stature in the world has diminished. And that's just not one member's opinion. That is the opinion of our international partners who we meet with frequently. Terrorists are emboldened and grabbing land around the world. Rogue nations are only more bellicose. Our adversaries, like Russia and China, capitalize on our indecision and absence from the world stage at their own strategic advantage. When policymakers embrace national security policies based on what sounds good in a speech, those left to untangle the mess are those gentlemen that you see sitting before us today and the very courageous men and women who work for those agencies. So I thank you, all of you, for the work that you do. Not only with the good work you're doing now, but for the years you have spent defending the country, for making the arguments, for standing up for what is right and needed at one of the most challenging times, I argue, in our national security's history, our country's history. But I also fear that this lack of leadership has created growing risk aversion within our intelligence agencies. As al-Qaeda has morphed and spread throughout Yemen, Syria, the Levant, and Africa, we have piled on here in Washington, D.C., even more bureaucracy on our intelligence agencies. Today, individuals who would have been previously removed from the battlefield by U.S. counterterrorism operations for attacking or plotting to attack against U.S. interests remain free because of self-imposed red tape. While we're busy pondering more transparency, our intelligence professionals are left paralyzed because of the totally incoherent policy guidance. So let me be the first to say publicly The President's May 2013 policy changes for the U.S. targeted strikes are an utter and complete failure, and they leave Americans' lives at risk. Those changes, while sounding nice in a speech, are today, right now, endangering the lives of Americans at home and our military overseas in a way that is frustrating to our allies and frustrating to those of us who engage in the oversight of our classified activities. As to Afghanistan, last year at this same hearing, I asked whether we had the conviction to cement our hard-fought gains and achieve a lasting victory, or would we just walk away? A year later, we seem even more focused on leaving the war before victory has been won. Yet we have already learned what happens after a hasty exit in Iraq. Instability in these countries gives al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups their most valued asset, ungoverned space, to plan, train, and conduct terrorist activities against the West and indeed our homeland. Such operational freedom results in loss of hard-fought gains. We are in a fight. Our policy should be dictated by what best protects America and not what is politically expedient. America's adversaries are not slowing down. Now is not the time to disengage from the world. The drip of classified information designed to undermine U.S. interests will continue, but we must move past false accusation and feigned outrage. We need leadership and clear thinking in a very difficult time. We must get back to business of protecting America, and we must give our intelligence services the clarity and certainty and the tools to be successful in that effort. That's why we look to you, the heads of our intelligence agencies, to find innovative ways to make sure that you have the ability to impact potential terrorist operations targeted at the United States and our allies, and collect the information for policymakers to make the right decision in difficult places of the world. It certainly is no small task. Before turning our witnesses over for an opening statement, I'll yield to Mr. Ruppersberger for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the Director of National Intelligence, General Clapper, CIA Director John Brennan, Director of Defense Intelligence Agency General Michael Flynn, FBI Director James Comey, and Matt Olson, Director of National Counterterrorism. Thank you for being here today, this important hearing, so that we can communicate to our constituents in America what the Intelligence Committee is doing. Throughout 2013, the Intelligence Committee continued to provide policymakers with the vital information necessary to promote the values and interests of America, as well as to protect and defend it. They did so amidst profound challenges not only abroad but at home too. But in Syria or Boston, the intelligence community has worked tremendously hard. This past year, the intelligence community has had to work amidst the worst leaks of classified information in our country's history. Make no mistake, when we hand over our classified information, our adversaries and enemies adjust accordingly. We know that this has happened already as a result of these leaks. Terrorist networks like al-Qaeda and foreign countries are changing their tactics to avoid our detection. With this, the work of the intelligence community to respond and uncover the threats become that much harder. We must, though, protect Americans. We must not forget that these authorities and capabilities are in place to keep our country and our citizens safe. While the intelligence community has followed the law, that is clear. It is apparent, though, that the public has lost some confidence in these programs, and we have to deal with that issue. I believe we must adopt important reforms to restore America's confidence in what the intelligence community does. We must increase transparency, strengthen oversight, and improve safeguards to privacy and civil liberties. I now want to look ahead to the challenges of 2014. The threats we face continue to grow. There is no greater example of this than the threats to America's cybersecurity. While the House passed the Cyber Intelligence Sharing and Protection Act, known as CISPA, last year, it has not yet become law, even though we work very closely with the White House, the intelligence community, critical infrastructure companies, various industries across the technology spectrum, and privacy and civil liberties groups to greatly improve the bill. This means that the government still cannot fully share cyber threat intelligence with the private sector, and the private sector cannot share cyber threat information with the government. In the meantime, countries and terrorists continue to attack our economic infrastructure, our trade secrets, and our critical infrastructure. We hear about these attacks in the news every day. Early, just last year, for example, our financial sector suffered a wide-scale network denial of service attack that proved difficult and very costly to mitigate. The retail giant Target is another recent example of our vulnerability to cyber attacks. We also have to do far more to expand our bench of cyber professionals and innovators by investing in early education in science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM education. Our adversaries are making heavy investments in the education of their youth, and we must also do the same. Education is the keystone of security and prosperity in the 21st century. As far as collection priorities this year, the intelligence community must remain vigilant on Iran. We must recognize that our consistent vigilance and our tough sanctions have brought us to a point where I believe important progress can be made on ending Iran's nuclear program. I'm hopeful that, and yet realistic on where we are and where we can go with sound intelligence, strong diplomacy, and robust defense. I'm encouraged to know that more can be done to keep a nuclear weapon out of the hands of dangerous Iran. In Syria, unfortunately, there is less cause for optimism. I applaud the agreement to remove Syria's chemical weapons, but I'm increasingly troubled by the delays. We must keep our attention focused on completing this process and doing it quickly. At the same time, we must not lose sight of the horrendous humanitarian crisis that continues in Syria, and we must remain vigilant against the rise of al-Qaeda and other extremists there. The area has become a magnet for terrorists, further destabilizing an already fragile region. We must ensure they do not make their way to America's shores or hurt our interests and allies overseas. And violent extremists are not just a problem in Syria. In 2013, we saw AQAP, AQ's Yemen faction, and the group North African affiliate AQIM pose a very severe threat to the United States. In August, the threat forced the State Department to close 19 embassies across the Middle East and North Africa in response to an AQAP plot that was, thanks to your efforts, intercepted. On the other hand, AQIM successfully conducted an attack against Western interests in Mali and Algeria, while Somalia-based terrorist group al-Shabaab committed a brutal attack in Kenya. As for China, we continue to look with great concern on their cyber activities, their counter-space posture, and on their recent moves in East China Sea. Beijing's so-called Air Defense Identification Zone, which would require U.S. forces to identify themselves and their mission to Chinese forces as they fly near or over certain tiny islands, is troubling power and a land grab. It's also an affront to international law. These moves increase the risk of misunderstanding and miscalculations between Washington and China, making the role of intelligence that much more important. In Russia, our athletes and athletes from around the world will be convening in just a few short days to compete in the 2014 Winter Olympics. In the past month, we have seen some troubling terrorist activity, and we must keep our guard. In Afghanistan, 2014 marks the year in which combat operations end, but we know our vital national security interests there will not cease. We need to maintain our intelligence efforts there even after the military withdrawals. Core al-Qaeda and the Taliban will continue to represent a threat, but we must not forget that Afghanistan is more than a front in the counterterrorism war. Afghanistan has broader strategic implications. It borders both Iran and Pakistan and is close to both Russia and China. This year, we must also continue to focus our attention on space. We must continue to promote our commercial space industry and relax those outdated regulations that are hampering our competitive advantage. I cannot emphasize enough that U.S. companies must also be allowed to compete in the free market. This competition will promote innovation in our space industry. Finally, we need to rely on the intelligence community to look where others are not, to lift their gaze beyond the shiny objects of today. We need to identify long-term trends that cut across individual states or groups. These trends, be they environmental, demographic, technology, or the emerging fault lines of conflict. Early action can avoid long-term pain. And we need to do all of this and everything we do in ways to protect civil liberties. Liberty and security are not mutually exclusive. We can and must work to protect both, and we must remain ever vigilant in this area. I look forward to hearing from you on these challenges facing our country, how you plan to address them, and how you're going to work individually. And finally, before I close, I want to take a moment to appreciate the men and women of the intelligence community who are working to keep us safe 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Especially with the government shutdown of last fall and the leaks, we heard a lot of negativity in 2013 directed towards federal employees generally and our intelligence professionals specifically. This is unfounded and unjust. These federal employees work nights, weekends, holidays, and in some of the most remote and dangerous locations to promote and defend the nation. And they do so not for money and not for fame, since they must often remain anonymous, but for love of country and dedication to its ideals. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Ruppersberger, and welcome back. Thank you. Look fit as ever. Director Clapper, I think the floor is yours.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Ruppersberger, and distinguished members of the committee. My colleagues and I are here today to present the intelligence community's worldwide threat assessment, as we do every year, although I must commend Ranking Member Ruppersberger for his outstanding rendition of the threat briefing. I'll cover about five topics in about 10 minutes on behalf of all of us. As DNI, this is my fourth appearance before the committee to discuss the threats we face. I've made this next assertion previously, but it is, if anything, even more evident and relevant today. Looking back over my more than half a century in intelligence, I've not experienced a time when we have been beset by more crises and threats around the globe. My list is long. It includes the scourge and diversification of terrorism, loosely connected and globally dispersed, to include here at home, as exemplified by the Boston Marathon bombing. The sectarian war in Syria, its attraction as a growing center of radical extremism and the potential threat this poses to the homeland. Let me briefly expand on this point. The strength of the insurgency in Syria is now estimated at somewhere between 75 or 80,000 or up to 110 to 15,000 insurgents who are organized into more than 1,500 groups of widely varying political leanings. Three of the most effective are the Al-Nusra Front, Ansar al-Sham, and the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, or ISIL as it's known, who in total about 26,000 insurgents. Complicating this further are the 7,500 or so foreign fighters from some 50 countries who have gravitated to Syria. Among them are a small group of AVPAC al-Qaeda veterans who have aspirations for external attack in Europe, if not the homeland. And there are many other crises and threats around the globe, to include the spillover of the Syria conflict into neighboring Lebanon and Iraq, the destabilizing flood of refugees in Jordan, Turkey, and Lebanon, now about 2.5 million people, a symptom of one of the largest humanitarian disasters in a decade. The implications of the drawdown in Afghanistan, the deteriorating internal security posture in Iraq, with AQI now in control of Fallujah, the growth of foreign cyber capabilities, nation-states and non-nation states as well, the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, aggressive nation-state intelligence efforts against us, an assertive Russia, a competitive China, a dangerous, unpredictable North Korea, a challenging Iran, lingering ethnic divisions in the Balkans, perpetual conflict and extremism in Africa, in Mali, Nigeria, the Central African Republic, and South Sudan, violent political struggles in, among others, Ukraine, Burma, Thailand, and Bangladesh, the specter of mass atrocities, the increasing stress of burgeoning populations, the urgent demands for energy, water, and food, the increasing sophistication of transnational crime, the tragedy and magnitude of human trafficking, the insidious rot of inventive synthetic drugs, the potential for pandemic diseases occasioned by the growth of drug-resistant bacteria. I could go on with this litany, but suffice to say that we live in a complex, dangerous world. The statements for the record that we've submitted, particularly the classified version, provide a comprehensive review of these and other daunting challenges. My second topic is what has consumed extraordinary time and energy for much of the past year in the intelligence community, in the Congress, in the White House, and of course in the public square. I'm speaking, of course, about potentially the most massive and most damaging theft of intelligence information in our history by Edward Snowden, and the ensuing avalanche of revelations published and broadcast around the world. I won't dwell on the debate about Snowden's motives or his legal standing, or on the supreme ironies occasioned by his choice of freedom-loving nations and beacons of free expression to which he fled, and from which he rails about what an Orwellian state he thinks this country has become. But what I do want to speak to as the nation's senior intelligence officer is the profound damage that his disclosures have caused and will continue to cause. And as a consequence, in my view, this nation is less safe and its people less secure. What Snowden has stolen and exposed has gone way, way beyond his professed concerns with so-called domestic surveillance programs. As a result, we've lost critical foreign intelligence collection sources, including some shared with us by valued partners. Terrorists and other adversaries of this country are going to school on U.S. intelligence sources, methods, and
The
trade
yeas are 225 and the nays are 193. The previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed say nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, and then I ask for a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote. A 5-minute vote.
The House moves on to the vote on the rule for a bill that would expand hunting and fishing on public lands. Over in the Senate, they gavel back in about 20 minutes, and they will take a final vote on the 5-year farm bill, which passed in the House last week. If it passes the Senate this afternoon, it will head shortly to the President's desk for his signature. That vote in the Senate expected about 2:35 Eastern. And you can follow that over on C-SPAN 2. This vote for the rule would provide for an hour of general debate and nearly a dozen amendments to consider. They'll do all that later if it passes, if the rule passes, but we don't expect a final passage vote on the hunting and fishing bill. Some more details on the bill from a reporter who's been covering the issue. The House begins debate on a package of bills dealing with hunting and fishing on federal lands, and we're joined by Phil Taylor, who's covering the issue for Environment and Energy Publishing. Phil Taylor, this bill is a package of a number of other hunting and fishing bills. Tell us what all's in here.
Well, it's a package of about 8 or 9 titles. The foundational title that has garnered the support of a lot of hunting and angling groups is Title 8 by Representative Dan Benishek. And at its core, it basically would amend the organic statutes of the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, and the Forest Service to ensure that those land management agencies, which oversee hundreds of millions of acres of public lands in the United States, mostly in the West, it would ensure that those land managers would take into account hunting and fishing and target shooting opportunities as they put together their land management plans.
So the net effect of this bill is that it would expand hunting and fishing on those lands?
That's the intent. You know, there's some debate going on in the House right now about whether or not hunting and fishing opportunities are really being stifled on public lands. This legislation really is to provide some legal teeth for these agencies so they can defend the decisions to open lands to hunting and fishing if they're ever taken to court. And so there's some language in that bill that has garnered some opposition from backcountry hunters, for example. It involves protections for wilderness lands. By and large, that title in the bill is supported by most hunting and fishing organizations.
Early on in the debate, you tweeted about that. Will lead ammunition hamper passage of the sportsman's package this Congress? What are they proposing? What's proposed in this bill about lead ammunition?
Well, that title has hampered passage of similar sportsman's packages in the Senate. It basically says that the Toxic Substances Control Act does not apply to ammunition or fishing tackle, and that's been of the U.S. EPA for years now. You know, some groups have significant concerns with the impacts of lead ammunition on birds, particularly the endangered California condor, as well as potential impacts to humans who consume wild game killed by lead ammunition. Now, again, a majority of sportsmen's groups don't believe there's a significant environmental or health concern here. The bill, the title would basically clarify that EPA does not have the authority to regulate lead ammunition. The issue, though, is that in the Senate, some leading Democrats have taken a very strong stance against that title. When Senator Jon Tester in late 2012 tried to push a broader sportsman's package that had this same language in it, Senator Barbara Boxer and Senator Ben Cardin, raised vocal opposition to that. It's one of the elements that probably hampered its ultimate passage.
On wild game, there's a provision in this bill, I understand, that deals with polar bear trophies from Canada. What would it do?
Basically, and I'm not familiar with the specifics of that title, but it essentially would give the Fish and Wildlife Service the authority to allow hunters who killed polar bears outside the country legally harvested polar bears would be allowed to import those into the United States. There are certain legal restrictions to doing so right now based on their endangered status under the Endangered Species Act. And again, this is a title that it's not opposed by many people. There's some wildlife advocacy groups that have raised concerns with it, but it has generated some controversy, no doubt.
In general, how's the White House view this sportsman's bill, this hunting and fishing bill that's coming up in the House?
Well, the White House issued a statement of policy last night opposing the bill. They do support some of the titles. Notably, they did say they don't oppose, they don't have any issue with the title involving the clarification of EPA's authority with respect to lead ammunition and fishing tackle. They did say they had concerns with, again, Title 8, the title by Congressman Benishek. They share the concerns of some conservation groups that there's some troubling language involving environmental reviews under the National Environmental Policy Act, as well as wilderness protections. But there was no veto threat. So the White House is not on board with this legislation, but they're not going to veto it.
Phil Taylor covers the Energy Department and the Forest Service and Interior Department for Energy and Environment and Energy Publishing, and you can follow his reporting on Twitter at Philip A. Taylor. Thank you for that update.
Thanks for having me.
Members voted.
On this vote, the yeas are 234, the nays are 185. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table.